I need to get this off my chest because I'm barely keeping it together. I don't even know where to start. My wife, Lindsay, and I have been married for 8 years. 8 solid years, or so I thought. We've had ups and downs like any marriage, but overall we were happy, or at least I was. Lately, though, things have felt off. First, it was little stuff. Lindsay started working out more, which I didn't think much of. She's always been into fitness. But then came the sudden late nights. Work functions, she said, or girls' nights. Normally, I wouldn't blink an eye, but it's been happening more and more. She comes home late, sometimes tipsy, her makeup still flawless, and her excuses just don't line up. Then there were the lies, small, stupid ones. She said she was meeting her sister one weekend, but when I casually asked her sister about it, she looked confused and said, "I haven't seen Lindsay in weeks." That was when the first real crack appeared in my trust. It's not like I was suspicious at first. I wanted to believe her. But when someone's stories don't add up over and over again, it's impossible to ignore. Then came the phone. She's always been private, but now, she's practically glued to it. She takes it to the bathroom, hides the screen when I walk by, and started sleeping with it under her pillow. The final straw was a message I accidentally caught a glimpse of last week. She was in the kitchen making coffee, and her phone buzzed on the counter. I wasn't trying to snoop, but when I glanced over, I saw something that froze me. "Last night was incredible. I can't wait to do it again." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I didn't say anything at first. Couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. Who sent that? What happened? Was it just one person? I wanted answers, but I knew if I confronted her without proof, she'd just deny it or twist the story. That night, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid she could hear it. I kept replaying everything in my head. The late nights, the lies, the message. I felt like I was suffocating in my own home, but I knew one thing. I needed to find out the truth. And so I started digging. The next morning, I couldn't look Lindsay in the eye. She was cheerful, humming as she got ready for the day, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching her like she was a stranger. Who had she become? And what was she hiding? I decided to start small. I didn't want her to suspect anything yet. That night, after she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and grabbed her phone. My hands were shaking as I tried to unlock it. Of course, the passcode was changed. My stomach dropped. The next few days, I paid close attention to her behavior. I watched her more closely than I ever had before. She was careful, too careful. She would leave her phone face down, barely glance at me when I asked about her plans, and her answers to simple questions felt rehearsed. It was a Saturday when I caught my first real lead. She told me she was going to a yoga retreat with her friends. "Just an overnight thing," she said, smiling as she kissed me goodbye. Something about the way she said it felt off, too chipper, too eager. After she left, I sat on the couch, my mind racing. Yoga retreat. Huh? I opened her laptop, praying she hadn't logged out of everything. And there it was, her email. No password required. Scrolling through her inbox, my heart sank deeper with every click. I found an invitation buried in a folder labeled work. It wasn't for yoga at all. It was for some exclusive party, something labeled members only, with an address on the other side of town. The details were vague, but the tone was clear. This wasn't just a casual get-together. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. Who was she meeting? And what exactly went on at these parties? I needed to know. That night, I called my best friend, Eric. He's the kind of guy who's seen it all, and I knew he'd give it to me straight. I told him everything, the messages, the late nights, the invitation. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "You need to go to that address. Don't confront her yet. Just see what's happening. You deserve to know." The idea terrified me, but Eric was right. I couldn't let this eat me alive any longer. I had to find out for myself. The next night, I parked a block away from the address I'd found in her email. The building was nondescript, a bland brick facade with no signage. But the cars parked outside told a different story. sleek, expensive, the kind you only see in movies. My palms were sweaty as I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw her, Lindsay, stepping out of a black SUV, laughing as she walked toward the entrance. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, tight and glittering under the streetlights. She looked different, confident, almost predatory. My stomach twisted in knots. I stayed in the car, watching as she disappeared inside. I didn't follow her. Not yet. My mind raced with questions, each one worse than the last. What the hell had I just stumbled into? The next morning, Lindsay acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. She came home late the night before, just as I had expected. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed. Her faint perfume lingered in the room. Something floral, something I didn't recognize. Over breakfast, she smiled and chatted about her yoga retreat. She said they meditated by the lake, talked about gratitude, and left their phones behind to unplug. I nodded along, playing the role of the oblivious husband, but every word she spoke felt like poison. That day, I couldn't focus on anything else. My mind kept returning to that brick building, the cars, and the way Lindsay had looked walking in, like she belonged there. Couldn't let it go. I needed to know what happened behind those closed doors. I drove back to the address the following night. I didn't tell anyone, not even Eric. Something about this felt too big, too dangerous to involve anyone else. This time, I parked closer and waited. People began arriving around 9 p.m. It was a strange mix. Some men in expensive suits, some women dressed like Lindsay had been the night before. They were laughing, chatting, moving with a kind of ease that made it clear this wasn't their first time. I got out of the car and walked toward the building, keeping my distance. I'd put on a blazer and nice shoes, hoping I wouldn't stand out too much. The front door was guarded by a man in a black suit. He was checking people in with a clipboard, nodding as they walked inside. When I reached him, I realized I hadn't thought this through. He glanced at me and asked, "Name?" John Smith," I said, trying to sound casual. The guard raised an eyebrow, scanning his list. "Not on the list." I froze, but then someone walked up behind me. A woman, mid-30s, blonde, wearing a dress that left little to the imagination. She smiled at the guard. "He's with me." The guard hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. I didn't even have time to thank her before she grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. "You're lucky I like strays," she said with a smirk. The inside of the building was nothing like the plain exterior. It was lavish. Dim lighting, expensive furniture, and music playing softly in the background. People mingled in small groups, holding glasses of wine or cocktails. I scanned the room, searching for Lindsay. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The woman who'd brought me in leaned close. "First time." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She laughed, a low, throaty sound. "You'll get the hang of it. Just remember the rules. No phones, no names, and no drama." Before I could ask her what the hell that meant, she drifted away into the crowd, leaving me standing there, completely out of my depth. I wandered through the rooms, trying to stay inconspicuous. The conversations I overheard were full of half-truths and inside jokes, everyone speaking in a kind of coded language. The deeper I went, the stranger it got. Then I saw her. Lindsay was sitting on a velvet couch in the corner of the room, laughing with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Her body language was different, relaxed, playful, like she didn't have a care in the world. I stayed hidden, watching her every move. She leaned toward him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she whispered something in his ear. He laughed, a deep, confident sound that made my blood boil. I wanted to storm over there, to demand answers, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I slipped out of the room, my mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't just cheating. This was something darker, something I didn't fully understand yet. But I was going to find out, no matter what it took. I didn't sleep that night. The image of Lindsay on that couch, her hand on that man's arm, was seared into my mind. It was like I'd walked into someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. What had I just witnessed? Who was my wife when she wasn't with me? The next morning, I was already sitting at the kitchen table when she came downstairs. She was radiant, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. She kissed my cheek and asked if I wanted pancakes. I wanted to scream at her, but I swallowed it down, forcing a smile. Sure, sounds good. As she bustled around the kitchen, I watched her carefully. Every laugh, every glance, every word. It all felt like a performance now. The woman I married wouldn't have been able to look me in the eye after what I'd seen. I needed more information, so I went back to her laptop. This time I dug deeper. I opened files, scanned through her calendar, and finally stumbled on something that stopped me cold. A document labeled Guest List. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a detailed schedule with dates, locations, and even themes. My heart pounded as I scanned through the entries, recognizing some of the places she'd told me she'd been over the past few months. They weren't yoga retreats or work events. They were parties. One entry stood out, a date from 2 weeks ago. Next to it, under attendees, was a name I didn't recognize, Marcus Hale. It had an asterisk next to it, and at the bottom of the page, the asterisk was explained. Asterisk special guest. I didn't know who Marcus Hale was, but I had a sinking feeling he was the man I'd seen her with the night before. Later that day, I called Eric again. I found something. I told him, my voice low and tight. What? He asked. I explained everything, the parties, the document, the man. Eric was quiet for a long moment before finally saying, "You need to be careful, man. This isn't just some random affair. This is organized. And if it's organized, it's dangerous." Dangerous? I asked, my throat dry. Think about it, Eric said. Who organizes these kinds of events? Who shows up to them? Rich people, powerful people. People who don't like being exposed. His words sent a chill down my spine. I realized how far out of my depth I was. This wasn't just about Lindsay betraying me. This was a whole world I didn't understand, and I was walking right into the middle of it. I decided to take the next step. I needed to know more about Marcus Hale, and I needed to know who was behind these parties. That night, while Lindsay was asleep, I used her laptop to dig deeper. It didn't take long to find him. Marcus Hale was all over social media. Flashy cars, private jets, a mansion that looked like a palace. He was a tech billionaire, and judging by the comments under his posts, he was as arrogant as he was rich. But it wasn't just him. As I dug deeper, I found posts and photos from other people who'd attended these events. They weren't hiding it, not completely. It was all there, buried under layers of vague captions and exclusive hashtags. I started saving everything, screenshots, photos, anything that could give me leverage. If Lindsay thought she could keep living this double life without me finding out, she was wrong. By the time I closed the laptop, the sun was starting to rise. I felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into something vast and unknowable. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. And I was done playing the fool. By the next evening, I was a man on a mission. The more I uncovered, the more it felt like I was peeling back the layers of some dark, twisted secret Lindsay had been hiding. The parties weren't just social events, they were something far more exclusive, far more sinister. I had to tread carefully. I couldn't let Lindsay suspect that I knew anything. She still acted like everything was fine, laughing at her favorite sitcoms and asking me about my day. But to me, every word out of her mouth was a lie. I called Eric again. "I need your help," I said bluntly. "All right, what's the plan?" he asked. "There's another party this weekend. It's at a different location. I need to figure out a way in." Eric hesitated. "Man, you're playing with fire here. If you're caught, this could blow up in your face." "I don't care," I snapped. "I need to know what's going on. I can't just sit here pretending everything's fine while she's out there doing whatever this is." After a long pause, Eric sighed. "Fine, let's figure it out." Together, we came up with a plan. I dressed the part, clean-shaven, suit and tie, nothing to raise suspicion. Eric would hang back in the car, ready to bolt if things went sideways. When the night of the party arrived, I was more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. The location this time was even more upscale. A sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, hidden behind tall gates and dense trees. As I approached the entrance, the same familiar scene greeted me. Expensive cars, well-dressed men and women, and a palpable air of exclusivity. The security was tighter here. 2 guards stood at the gate, checking names against a list. This time I had a plan. I'd taken the name of one of the attendees from the guest list on Lindsay's laptop, a name I'd verified through her emails. When the guard asked for my name, I said it with confidence. Jason Foster. The guard glanced at his clipboard, then nodded. Go ahead. Relief washed over me as I stepped inside. The estate was even more extravagant than I'd imagined. Chandeliers, marble floors, waitstaff carrying trays of champagne. It was like stepping into a scene from a movie. I moved carefully, sticking to the edges of the room, observing without drawing attention to myself. The people here weren't just wealthy, they were powerful. Politicians, executives, celebrities. And then there was Lindsay. She stood near the grand staircase, her arm linked with Marcus Hale. My stomach churned at the sight of her laughing, leaning into him like they were the only 2 people in the world. I kept my distance, staying just close enough to hear snippets of their conversation. Marcus was talking about taking things to the next level, whatever that meant. Lindsay smiled and nodded, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. The night dragged on, each passing moment twisting the knife deeper. I watched her mingle, watched her laugh, watched her live a life I knew nothing about. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Lindsay slipped her hand into Marcus's and led him toward a door at the back of the room. They disappeared inside, and the door shut behind them. I wanted to follow, but something stopped me. The pit in my stomach told me whatever was behind that door wasn't meant for me to see. Instead, I turned and left, slipping out the way I came. Eric was waiting for me in the car. Well? He asked. I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, my thoughts a tangled mess. We're in deeper than I thought, I finally said. This isn't just an affair. It's something bigger, and I'm going to burn it to the ground. Eric didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes told me he understood. I didn't know what my next move would be yet, but one thing was clear. Lindsay had built her new life on lies, and I was about to dismantle every last piece of it. The next morning, I couldn't shake the image of Lindsay leading Marcus Hale through that door. What was back there? And why did she look so at ease, so comfortable in a world I didn't recognize? I started researching Marcus Hale. His name was all over the internet. Philanthropy events, tech conventions, even whispers of shady dealings that never seemed to stick. His wealth wasn't just about money. It was about power. Every article painted him as untouchable, someone who could bend the rules and walk away unscathed. And Lindsay? She wasn't just part of this world. She was thriving in it. That day, I went back to her laptop while she was out running errands. I needed answers, real answers, not just guesses and assumptions. After hours of digging through files and emails, I found what I was looking for. Encrypted folders buried deep in her cloud storage. Took some time, but I managed to crack one of them. What I found inside made my stomach turn. Photos, videos, and detailed itineraries for these parties. It was all laid out, who attended, where they were held, and even private activities for select guests. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the files. There was Lindsay, smiling and posing with people I'd only ever seen on TV or in magazines. She wasn't just attending these events. She was deeply involved. But then I found something worse. An email thread between Lindsay and Marcus. He was promising her more. A future, opportunities, freedom from the constraints of her current life. Lindsay's replies were gushing, full of excitement and admiration. And then there was the line that broke me. I'm ready to leave it all behind for this. Leave it all behind. Leave me behind. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. For years, I thought we were building a life together. But now it was clear she was building a way out. That night, I confronted Eric again. She's planning to leave, I said, my voice hollow. With him. Eric asked. I nodded. It's all in her emails. She's not just cheating, Eric. She's planning to disappear, to leave me behind like none of this ever mattered. Eric leaned back, rubbing his jaw. So what's the play? You've got evidence. You could go straight to a lawyer, blow this whole thing up. No, I said quickly. Not yet. If I go to a lawyer now, she'll spin it. She's good at that, Eric. She'll turn it around, make me the bad guy. I need something bigger, something that leaves no doubt. Eric hesitated, then leaned forward. You're playing with fire, man. People like Marcus Hale don't mess around. You go after him, you'd better be ready for the fallout. I don't care, I said, my voice steady. They think they're untouchable. But I'm going to show them what it feels like to lose everything. Over the next few days, I poured all my energy into gathering evidence. I tracked down more encrypted files, pieced together email threads, and even found bank statements that hinted at payments Lindsay was receiving. Payments she'd never mentioned to me. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, calculated, and deliberate. But I wasn't just gathering evidence to protect myself. I was planning my revenge. The first step was subtle. I started moving money out of our joint accounts, funneling it into a private one Lindsay couldn't access. I made copies of every document, every video, and stored them on secure drives in places she'd never find. I wasn't just preparing for a divorce. I was preparing to destroy her new life before it even began. And when I was done, I'd make sure Marcus Hale wouldn't walk away unscathed either. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was just some clueless husband who wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. The days dragged on, every moment with Lindsay feeling like a cruel joke. She smiled at me, kissed me goodnight, and asked how my day was, all while plotting her escape behind my back. But I didn't let it show. If anything, I acted more attentive, more interested, and more trusting than ever. I wanted her to feel safe. I needed her to keep slipping up. The more I uncovered, the darker things became. One night, while combing through another encrypted folder, I found what looked like a financial ledger. It wasn't just money being exchanged for these parties, it was favors, deals, and connections. Lindsay's name was tied to several transactions, some of which involved ridiculous sums of money. She wasn't just a participant in Marcus's world. She was a player. But then, I found the document that shifted everything. It was a detailed outline of a new business venture Marcus was launching. The file referred to Lindsay as a key partner. My stomach churned as I read through the details. This wasn't just infidelity. She was helping Marcus expand his reach, using her charm and connections to bring more people into his twisted world. I knew I couldn't take this to the police. Not yet. Marcus was too powerful, and Lindsay had made herself invaluable to him. They'd cover their tracks, twist the story, and make it disappear. No, I needed to take a different approach. I needed to make them vulnerable. The first step was to plant doubt. If Lindsay thought someone was onto her, she might get sloppy. So I started leaving small clues. A password she'd changed on her laptop was suddenly reset. A printout of one of her emails accidentally left in my car. Little things that would make her wonder if her secrets were still safe. It worked. Over the next week, she grew jumpy, constantly checking her phone and looking over her shoulder. She started asking me odd questions. Have you seen my laptop? Did you move my files? I played dumb, shaking my head and telling her I had no idea what she was talking about. Meanwhile, I kept digging. I reached out to Eric again, this time with a clear plan. I need someone on the inside, I told him. What do you mean? I need someone who knows how these parties operate. Someone who can give me the details I can't find online. Eric hesitated. That's a big ask. You're talking about infiltrating their circle. Do you have any idea how risky that is? I don't care, I said. Lindsay isn't the woman I married. She's someone else now, and she's part of something dangerous. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. Eric sighed. All right, I'll ask around. But if you're doing this, you need to be ready for whatever you find. You might not like the answers. I already don't like the answers, I muttered. Took a few days, but Eric came through. He found someone. a former attendee of Marcus's parties who had fallen out of favor with the group. They didn't want their name involved, but they agreed to meet with me under one condition: total anonymity. I met them late one night at a diner on the edge of town. They were jittery, constantly glancing at the door like they expected someone to burst in at any moment. "You want to know what goes on at those parties?" they asked, their voice low. I nodded. "It's worse than you think. These people, they're not just rich. They're predators. They use those parties to control people, to own them. They trap them with favors, secrets, and money. Once you're in, you don't leave." My blood turned to ice. "And your wife? If she's involved with Marcus Hale, she's deeper in than you realize. He doesn't let anyone get close unless he can use them. She's not just cheating on you, man. She's sold herself to him." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "How do I stop it?" I asked. The person hesitated, then leaned closer. "You can't stop him, but you can expose him. He thrives on secrecy. If you take that away, he's nothing. But you better be ready to burn everything down in the process. Once you start, there's no going back." As I left the diner that night, their words echoed in my head. Burn everything down. I looked at the house as I pulled into the driveway, the lights glowing warmly in the windows. Lindsay was inside, probably texting Marcus, probably thinking she was untouchable. She had no idea what was coming. The more I thought about the diner conversation, the clearer my path became. If Lindsay and Marcus thrived on secrecy, I would take that away from them. I wasn't going to just confront her or run to a lawyer. Not yet. That was too simple, too clean. No, I wanted them to feel exposed, humiliated, powerless. But to pull it off, I needed to get closer to their world. I spent the next few days going through the files I'd copied, piecing together patterns and connections. I found lists of names, attendees, organizers, even staff who worked these events. Some were big names in business and politics. Others were people who, like Lindsay, were being groomed for bigger roles. One name stood out. A woman named Christine Miller. She appeared in multiple emails and itineraries, often listed as a coordinator. From the tone of the messages, she seemed to be a gatekeeper of sorts, a confidant to Marcus and a handler for new recruits. If anyone knew the inner workings of these parties, it was her. I tracked Christine down through social media and found out she worked as a freelance event planner. It didn't take much to find her office address. The next day, I walked in pretending to be a potential client. Christine was sharp, polished, and professional, but there was something cold about her. She greeted me with a tight smile and offered me a seat. "I understand you plan private events," I began, keeping my tone casual. "That's correct," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "I'm looking for something exclusive," I said, choosing my words carefully. Discreet, a little off the beaten path. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. "What exactly do you mean by that?" I leaned in slightly. "I've heard about Marcus Hale's gatherings. I was told you might be able to help me get involved." Her expression didn't change, but I saw the subtle shift in her posture. Alert, wary. "I don't know what you're talking about." I chuckled softly, leaning back in my chair. "Come on, Christine. I know how these things work. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to be part of the network." There was a long silence. Finally, she sighed. "If you're serious about this, there's a process. You don't just walk in off the street." "I understand," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." She studied me for a moment before pulling out a business card. "Call this number. They'll vet you. If you pass, you'll get an invitation." I nodded, pocketing the card. "Thank you." As I left her office, my heart was pounding. I just put myself one step closer to their world. That night, I made the call. The voice on the other end was smooth, detached, and professional. They asked me a series of questions: my name, my occupation, my income level, and why I wanted to attend. I answered carefully, knowing every word would be scrutinized. After a long pause, the voice said, "You'll receive further instructions via email. Be ready." When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of triumph and dread. I was in. Over the next few days, I prepared meticulously. I rented a new suit, updated my appearance, and practiced staying calm under pressure. Eric thought I was insane, but he didn't try to stop me. "Just make sure you come back in one piece," he said. When the email finally arrived, it included a date, time, and location. The event was being held at another lavish estate, even more secluded than the last one. The instructions were clear: no phones, no recording devices, and no mention of the event outside the circle. The night of the event, I parked a mile away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding with every step. This time, there were no guards at the door, just a valet who took my name and waved me inside. The atmosphere was electric, the crowd even more opulent than before. But I wasn't here to mingle. I wasn't here to drink their champagne or marvel at their wealth. I was here to bring it all crashing down. And as I scanned the room, my eyes landed on Lindsay. She was standing with Marcus again, her smile dazzling, her laughter ringing out like a melody. She didn't see me yet, but she would. And when she did, everything would change. I stayed on the outskirts of the room, careful not to draw attention to myself. The crowd was a mix of the elite and the infamous, men and women dripping in wealth, trading sly smiles and cryptic conversations. It was a different world, one that Lindsay had somehow found her way into. She was radiant, wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her in all the right places. She was laughing at something Marcus said, her hand lightly resting on his chest. It was intimate, casual, and nauseating to watch. I stayed back, positioning myself behind a tall, floral centerpiece. My goal wasn't just to watch, it was to confront her, but on my terms. I wanted to catch her off guard, to watch her mask slip in front of these people she had worked so hard to impress. Then it happened. She glanced around the room and froze. Her eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, her entire demeanor changed. The laughter faded from her face, replaced by shock, and then panic. Marcus noticed her reaction and turned to follow her gaze. His expression was harder to read, but I saw his body tense as his eyes met mine. Lindsay excused herself from their conversation and began making her way toward me. She moved quickly but deliberately, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me into a quieter corner. I smiled coldly. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." Her eyes darted around, making sure no one was listening. "You need to leave. Now." "Why?" "Embarrassed to have your husband crash your little playground." Her face hardened. "You have no idea what you're doing, Jack. You shouldn't be here." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You're right. I didn't know. But now I do. I've seen the emails, Lindsay, the photos, the money transfers. I know everything." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she looked genuinely frightened. But then her expression shifted, her panic replaced by anger. "You've been spying on me?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Don't even try to play the victim here. You've been lying to me for months, no years. And now, I find out you're part of this." I gestured to the opulent room around us. "Whatever the hell this is?" She crossed her arms, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "You don't understand. This isn't what you think it is." "Oh, really?" I shot back. "Then enlighten me, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've traded your marriage for this." Her eyes flared with anger. "It's more complicated than that. This is an opportunity. A chance to be part of something bigger. Something important." "Important?" I sneered. "Important enough to lie to me? To betray me? To sell yourself to Marcus Hale?" At the mention of Marcus's name, her face twisted in fury. "Keep your voice down," she snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think I do," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "And guess what? I'm not leaving. Not until I've seen enough to burn this whole operation to the ground." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us crackling with tension. I saw something flicker in her eyes then. Fear, maybe, or regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold and controlled. "If you want to play hero, go ahead. But don't say I didn't warn you." She turned on her heel and walked away, her shoulders stiff, her head held high. I watched her go, a mix of anger and heartbreak churning in my chest. She didn't care about the damage she'd done. She didn't care about me, but I cared enough to keep going. Whatever she thought she was protecting, whatever she thought she could hide, it was only a matter of time before I exposed it all. And the next time she saw me, I wouldn't just be watching from the shadows. I'd be the one pulling the strings. After Lindsay stormed away, I stayed rooted in place, my mind racing. She hadn't denied anything, hadn't even tried to explain herself. Instead, she'd warned me, almost as if I were the one in danger. But I wasn't leaving. Not now. Not when I was finally getting a glimpse of the world she'd chosen over our life together. I moved deeper into the crowd, careful to stay inconspicuous. My goal was simple: gather as much information as possible. The more I could uncover about Marcus, Lindsay, and whatever this operation was, the stronger my position would be when I decided to blow it all apart. The house was enormous, with room after room filled with people. Some were laughing and drinking, others huddled together in hushed conversations. It wasn't just a party. It was a web of connections, deals, and secrets. As I wandered through the rooms, I spotted Marcus near the bar. He was holding court, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women draped in expensive jewelry. He exuded confidence, power, and control. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but I knew better. A man like Marcus wouldn't be rattled by a jealous husband. If anything, he'd use my emotions against me. Instead, I kept my distance, listening carefully to the conversations around me. I heard mentions of projects, partnerships, and mutual benefits. It was all vague, but the tone was clear. This wasn't just about parties. This was business, and Marcus was at the center of it. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A man standing near me, sipping a glass of scotch, leaned toward his companion and said, "Did you hear about the new recruits? Hale's got his wife pulling strings again. She's a real asset." His companion laughed. "I'd say so. She's brought in half the guest list tonight." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. So that was it. Lindsay wasn't just attending these events. She was recruiting for them. She was actively helping Marcus expand his empire. I left the room before I did something stupid, my heart pounding in my chest. The betrayal was worse than I'd imagined. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was building a life that depended on my ignorance and her deceit. As I wandered through the house, I noticed something strange. A set of stairs near the back of the main hall, guarded by two men in black suits. People passed by them without a glance, as if the stairs didn't exist. I watched for a while, noting how only certain individuals were allowed to go upstairs. They were escorted by one of the guards, their expressions calm but purposeful. Whatever was happening up there, it wasn't part of the main event. I needed to find a way past those guards. I waited until one of the men stepped away, leaving the other distracted by a guest asking for directions to the restroom. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the stairs, keeping my head down and my pace steady. "Excuse me, sir," the remaining guard said, stepping in front of me. "This area is restricted." I forced a smile. "Sorry, I thought the restroom was this way." He pointed back toward the main hall. "Second door on the left." "Thanks," I said, turning away and walking back toward the crowd. It was clear I wouldn't get upstairs without a plan. But the fact that the area was restricted only made me more determined to find out what was up there. As I returned to the main hall, I spotted Lindsay again. She was talking to a group of women, her smile bright but her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was looking for me. Good. Let her wonder what I was up to. I wasn't leaving without answers. And if I couldn't get upstairs tonight, I'd find another way. One thing was certain. Whatever secrets were hidden in this house, they wouldn't stay hidden for long. The rest of the night, I stayed low, keeping my distance from Lindsay and Marcus. My mind kept drifting to those stairs, the guarded area, and what might be happening up there. As I moved through the crowd, I spotted someone familiar, Christine Miller, the event planner who had given me the contact for this party. She wasn't mingling like the others. She was talking to a man in hushed tones, her expression serious. I drifted closer, pretending to browse a tray of drinks. "Tighten security," she was saying. "We can't afford another slip." The man nodded. "Understood. The last thing we need is another breach." They glanced around, and I quickly stepped away before they could notice me. Slip? Breach? My gut told me they weren't just talking about party logistics. Whatever was going on here ran deeper than I'd imagined. For now, I had enough. I'd seen the cracks, and I was going to widen them. But first, I needed to leave without raising suspicion. As I stepped toward the exit, I felt someone grab my arm. I turned to find Lindsay, her eyes blazing with anger. "What are you still doing here?" she demanded in a low voice. I smiled coldly. "Just soaking it all in." Her grip tightened. "You don't know what you're messing with, Jack." "Oh, I think I'm starting to," I replied, pulling my arm free. "And I'm just getting started." Before she could respond, I walked out the door, her glare burning into my back. The next day, I couldn't shake what I'd seen and heard. The guarded stares, the cryptic conversations, it all pointed to something bigger. I needed proof. I dove back into Lindsay's files. Buried deep in an encrypted folder was a map of the estate I had just left. My pulse quickened. The second floor wasn't just rooms. It was labeled private sessions, with arrows pointing to different chambers. Each chamber had a single letter, A, B, C. And next to them were names. Familiar names, politicians, CEOs, even a judge. This wasn't just a party. This was a hub for secrets, power plays, and leverage. And Lindsay was part of it. I printed everything, the map, the names, the schedules. Every piece of evidence I could gather went into a folder, which I locked away in a safe deposit box. If things went sideways, I wanted insurance. Lindsay came home late again that night. I watched her from the couch as she walked in, her expression guarded. "You're still awake?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Couldn't sleep," I said, my eyes fixed on her. "You've been busy lately." Her smile faltered. "You know how work is." I nodded slowly. "Sure. Work." Her unease was palpable. Good. Let her sweat. She had no idea how much I already knew, or what I was about to do next. The next morning, I made my move. I sent anonymous emails to several key people, journalists, law enforcement, even a few of the names I'd seen on the list. Each email included select pieces of evidence. The map, the guest lists, and mentions of Marcus Hale's activities. I knew it would cause chaos, but that was the point. By the afternoon, whispers had already started online. Stories about an exclusive network hosting secretive events were gaining traction. I kept refreshing news feeds, waiting for the explosion. That evening, Lindsay's phone rang. She answered quickly, her voice tense. I couldn't hear the other person, but her face drained of color. She hung up and turned to me, her expression frantic. "Did you hear about the news today?" I shrugged, feigning indifference. "Why?" "Something important." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. She was already too busy scrambling to contain the damage. By the next morning, the news had spread like wildfire. Reports were everywhere. Scandals involving powerful figures, leaked documents pointing to Marcus Hale's events, and questions about illegal activities. Lindsay was pacing the kitchen, her phone glued to her ear. Every call seemed more frantic than the last. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, watching her unravel. When she finally hung up, she turned to me, her face pale. "You did this, didn't you?" I set my mug down slowly, meeting her gaze. "What if I did? What were you expecting, Lindsay? For me to sit here and let you destroy everything while you played house with Marcus?" Her hands trembled. "You don't understand what you've done. These people, they don't forgive." I stood, leaning in close. "Neither do I." She stared at me, her mask of composure completely shattered. I didn't care. Whatever consequences she faced now, she'd earned them. The last thing I said before walking out the door was simple. "Good luck cleaning up the mess." And with that, I left her standing there, her perfect little world crumbling around her.